This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Brendan Leonard. Brendan is back for his third appearance on the podcast, this time recorded in person at his house in Missoula. Brendan's the creative mind behind Semi-Rad, and over the years he's become a good friend and one of my most trusted advisors when it comes to creativity and building a life around the things you care about. He's a writer, illustrator, filmmaker, ultrarunner, teacher, an all-around creative machine, someone who's carved out a career by doing things his own way, with a healthy dose of humor and generosity. This episode is pretty much two friends sitting at a kitchen table having a laid-back chat about our long list of shared interests. We talk about everything from teaching creative writing and designing online courses, to the pros and cons of Substack, to how to market your work without feeling like a sellout. We dig into the practical side of creativity, how to make things, share them, and make a living without losing the joy and weirdness that make you want to create in the first place. We also get into self-publishing versus traditional publishing, why Brendan makes funny books like 15-second recipes, and why he believes that generosity, self-deprecation, and consistency matter more than flash or perfection. There's a lot here for anyone trying to make meaningful things in the margins of a very busy life, or build a creative life from the ground up. If you're new to Brendan's work, be sure to check out his website, newsletter, and his earlier podcast episodes here on Mountain and Prairie. I'd also specifically encourage you to check out his most recent book called Ultra Something, his most recent film called The 7 Summits of My Neighborhood, and the podcast he co-hosts, which is called The Trailhead. There are links to everything in the episode notes. Brendan's one of the most thoughtful, practical, and humble voices out there when it comes to creative work, and I'm always better off after talking to him. Hope you enjoy. First question for you is, I was talking to one of my buddies the other day who was on a podcast, and he was saying that the guy who was interviewing him was like an acquaintance, and they knew each other, and they were kind of talking before they started recording, and then when the guy hit record, his voice changed to like Mr. Radio DJ voice. And so is my voice different than it's been for the last 24 hours?
Is my voice different, Ed?
You just blew out the...
I'm sorry. Shit.
You're a professional podcaster now, too. We need a confirmation that I'm not like, this isn't an act. I'm just completely being myself, right?
I don't think I've ever heard a podcast episode of yours where I thought it was an act.
All right,
yeah.
Good. All right, I'm on the right track. Well, I'm going to keep the compliments to a minimum because you get all antsy when I start giving you compliments. But I tell people all the time, they're like, ask me questions about podcasts. I'm like, there are two people in the history of the world that I take advice from on the podcast. Brendan Leonard is one of them. And so like, you've been so encouraging when I showed up at your house with all this equipment. I didn't know how to work it, actually. I don't know if you knew that.
You didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I didn't know how to work it. It was the new equipment. But anyway, you've been so encouraging, and I think I've learned a lot from you, and I know a lot of other people have through your teaching courses, writing teaching courses, and I've kind of followed in your footsteps with that, like with Freeflow Institute. So I was wondering if you could just talk a bit about how you got into teaching, because I feel like that's kind of a big part of what you do now. You've been doing it for many years.
I got introduced to Chandra from the Freeflow Institute, and that is how I started teaching. She said, a mutual friend of ours said, I think you'd be good at this. And I was like, I don't know if I would, but sure, let's see what happens. And Chandra and I met basically we just talked over the phone, and I developed a course. The first year was 2019 on the Middle Fork of the Salmon. I fell out of the boat.
Did you?
Second day, maybe. I didn't want to be on the paddle raft anyway. No. But they were like, we need somebody. And it was kind of like we only had 3 people paddling, and I was the only one on one side. And anyways, the whole thing, but it was the worst river swim I've ever had. So it was just like, it was like learn, baptism by fire, jump in and see what works. And I wonder if you asked some of those people on that first course I did, if they thought I was any good.
Do you remember like what you did on that course? Like what the lessons were compared to what you do now?
It's pretty similar. I sort of like, I should look actually. But it's like breaking down, telling a story into parts and like different techniques people can use, and just looking at stuff and saying like, this is this part, it's like looking down under the hood of a car.
Sure.
And being like, this is the engine, this is where you put in coolant, this is, whatever, all these different parts, and just doing that with a story, with written stories, and saying, demystifying it for people, I guess. And then mostly saying, you can do this too, and the one thing that's definitely been the same the entire time is that everybody brings a roughly 1,200 word narrative essay to the workshop, and we workshop it. Like,
oh, nice.
Bring 12 copies or however many students there are. Everybody reads your story. Everybody puts some notes on it, and then we go around the circle, and you get grilled hardcore. No, you don't. The rule I say is that for every one place for improvement you say is in the story, you have to tell people 3 things you liked.
That's awesome.
Which we don't count, and I'm sure no one actually makes sure they have that ratio, but like, it's just like to make it so people feel like writing when they leave.
Yeah.
Because they're going to go home and they're going to get busy, and they're going to have this wonderful experience on the river or wherever we do the writing workshop. And they're going to be like fired up about writing, and then they're going to go home and they're going to get busy and they're not going to be able to do it. And to have one more obstacle when they go home, not feeling like it because so-and-so said this part of your story was terrible or whatever, is just, it's not something I want to do for people. Like, people aren't going to write anyway. You need to help them feel like they can. So that's the number one thing. And, showing people this, like, people aren't really special. They just tried, they just gave themselves permission to try to write and fail and learn. And, I think that's what most people are looking for, honestly.
Yeah. I think that the transition from, especially on a river trip like Freeflow, where it's just, you're all in, no self-service, is pretty intense. And I think everybody gets pretty psyched up about it, but then the real world hits. I mean, I think that's like the most, because I feel like with your writing, there's obviously like a craft to it, and you've got these systems that you've created that you can teach people about the actual craft, like all the stuff you're building around here right now. But then there is just needing to do it. And I feel like that's one of the things I've learned from you is just, you could sit around and think about craft all day long, but unless you actually just start doing it and messing around and screwing up, and I mean, that's where it, where did you learn that? Because I mean, you went to journalism school, like you've had the kind of classical education on writing, but where did you?
Classical, that's pretty elevated, dude. I don't know about that.
but like, who do you admire? Like, who are your teachers? Who would you consider, whether you know them or not, people that have been your teachers for writing?
I got a master's in journalism from the University of Montana, our little school down the street.
Graduate
down the street here.
Yes.
The Harvard of Western Montana, as I was trying to tell my buddy the other day. Send your kids here. It's great. But in journalism is more like, it's the house painting of writing to me. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, you have this very functional thing that you can get paid to do. People need their houses painted. People need the insides painted, whatever. You can get it work. And something that's more like an English degree or an MFA might be more like you're learning fine art painting, like how to paint landscapes and oil paintings. And, maybe people will buy your paintings, but also maybe not.
Yeah.
But so it's more, much more practical, I would almost say. Mm-hmm. So... you and I were talking yesterday, or maybe that was today, and I said, like there's writers who use words like a paintbrush, and I use words more like a screwdriver. Mm-hmm. So like I kind of know where we want to go with this, and I don't use a lot of fancy language because I don't know any. Journalism, they trained you at the time for newspapers was like write it at a 3rd grade level. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I ever got much beyond that, honestly. So that was like an education, in a way. But it was more like the things I learned, like 4 or 5 things beyond how to structure a story, like how to sell a story to a magazine.
Yeah.
And I took a creative nonfiction workshop here, and like that blew my mind. It was like, oh, this is the writing I want to do compared to, writing about city government or whatever, reporting on that stuff, dude, being a newspaper reporter. So I just kind of like fumbled around for years and figured it out. And, I watched other people who my friend Fitz, who started the Dirtbag Diaries podcast, who was also was a journalist at the beginning of his career, but found people did not want to run the stories that he wanted to write. So he just started recording them into a recorder in his closet, and he called that a podcast, and it took off. And that was incredible. Not inspiration, but just seeing that somebody could do it, like in that way. And so that's kind of what I did starting in 2011, just started my own website, and it's like, I'll just write the stuff, see if it goes anywhere. And it went somewhere.
One more thing about teaching, I feel like whenever I have to teach somebody something, it makes me learn it in either better or in a different way. What would you say from Freeflow? And then we can talk about online, but Freeflow, like, what have you learned? Like, how have you come out of that different as a creative person?
Isn't that called the Feynman technique? But it's for sure, you're like making yourself write these things down and figure out where they are or how they work. And, I have learned through that, it's very hard to find examples of the stuff I'm talking about online anymore. It's pretty difficult, honestly, to find short essays to show people and say, this is how you should do it.
What, everything's longer or is either super long or memes?
Well, I used to find a lot of stuff on like Adventure Journal's website.
Yep. And
they kind of have stopped doing much online. So there isn't much there. There's some old stuff, that's good. But I kind of don't want to be like sending people stuff from like 2017 or whatever. And, not to throw those guys under the bus, but all their good stuff is in the magazine now. And outside, used to do a lot of good writing, but it's very much, I would say, reader service sort of stuff, or things that will get clicks. Mm-hmm. So there just isn't like this narrative. And even Substack, I feel like there's tons of great writing, right? But like there are very few what I would call stories that put you in an alternate reality, where you're following somebody who goes about some little adventure, even if it's just like a very pedestrian thing that happens to them on a Tuesday, or climbing Mount Everest, whatever. But there's very little of that, especially in a short, digestible form. It's like 1,200 words, like we say, like 6 or 7 minute read. Like there's a lot of people going on for like 5,000 words, and there's a lot of people writing about politics, and there's a lot of people writing about, things that happened in the last few days, and how they're reacting to it, or something somebody else said. But it's hard to find the people who are creating these stories. And I found a couple, and I'm like really excited to have found their Substacks, and like be in their world for a few minutes.
Well, that's a question I've been meaning to ask you over the last day or two, is Substack versus having your own website. Because I feel like Substack's obviously powerful, and it can get people, it's this network. But me personally, I don't like the like feature. I don't like, I don't like looking at that and being like, oh, I only got 3 or 4 likes. So how do you think about plugging into a network like Substack, which nowadays, I think is super competitive, and you're competing against all these people directly. It's almost like being at a farmer's market versus having your own farm. And I feel like having your own website, your own domain where you own it, you're not sharecropping on Substack's platform. How do you think about if you're giving advice to somebody and they say, I want to start writing, would you say get on Substack, or would you say start your own blog and then maybe repost it on Substack or something else? Yeah,
it's not perfect, and I do put my newsletter on Substack, but it's about less than 10% of my readership is over there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I just don't want to go over there fully.
What's going to change? One day it ain't going to be good like Instagram is now.
Well, it could be, right? But you still have all those email addresses. That's the thing. Yeah. Like, so if somebody's saying like, I just want to start writing regularly and publishing it and trying to get, an audience, or community, I would say, Substack is a good move. Like you can, if you decide you're like, hey, I disagree with, a number of people disagree with some political stuff they did, or I guess maybe they would call censorship, but like some decisions they made and they left, and you can still do that. No matter how long you've been on there. But the thing I would say that's positive about it is that it is a community of people who are a lot of the people on Substack are writers.
Yes.
Therefore, they read, which is unlike Instagram. People don't want to read your 5,000 word essay. They want to interact with you for 3 seconds.
Max.
Yeah. And so that's tough. And I would say any of the microblogging sites like Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, is kind of similar. Like, no, I don't know that we want to click away and read your 1,500 word thing. I want to read your pithy, 180 character, tweet or whatever, 140, however long they are. So I think that's valuable. And you can also, another thing that I don't do very much of, which I should do more of, but if you want to direct people to your Substack, they got to come from somewhere. So being a real person on Substack, reading other people's stories, commenting on them, like having conversations within their little social media platform. I forget what it's actually called. Notes. Yeah.
Yeah. Notes. Yeah.
That can get people to your Substack and get you readers, which is cool. It's like, it's a one-stop sort of thing, as opposed to being like link in bio or like,
sure,
who is this person? And then trying to get people there. So I think those are advantages. I don't know that the financial side of it is any worse than something like Patreon, but I'm so in with Patreon that I couldn't just say to everybody who supports me on Patreon, hey, just support me on Substack instead. They'd be like, nah.
You'd lose 75%.
Yeah, but you lose 95%. So it's definitely not perfect, and nothing ever is going to be.
Well, you talk about your writing, like the paintbrush, what did you say, a hammer or screwdriver?
Screwdriver, yeah.
And I feel like you're very practical as well when it comes to marketing your work and figuring out a way to earn a living, because this is your full-time job, and your granddad was not John D. Rockefeller. Like your boss, this is your job. And so when you're talking about Substack, like you have these ideas of how you can get people to find your work. And I feel like you're very intentional about marketing your work in a thoughtful way. Like, what would you say to a student or somebody who's, super creative, super talented, but they're like, I don't want to market my work. I'm not interested in what's your response to that? Because I hear that a lot. I mean, I hear it from published authors. People get a book deal. They spend a year writing a book, goes through this whole thing with a major publisher. And they're like, I hate marketing myself.
Well, you better get a really good agent then, because if you don't want to talk about it, I mean, do you believe in it at least enough to tell people that they might like it? Because that's kind of where I am, And I also I would say everybody who is an artist in some ways does hate that part. Like,
sure,
that's not our favorite part, no matter what. Some people get into it reverse. They're good at marketing and then they decide they're going to write a book or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the first thing I would tell somebody is like, if it's coming from me and my advice, I'm like, well, I'm pretty lost too. Like this stuff worked for me over the past 10 years, but I feel like I'm behind. But you kind of have to, you have to at least advocate for yourself. And even if it's just saying, I made this thing, you might like it too, maybe not,
Yeah, that's Seth Godin's advice.
Yeah,
I made this.
You don't have to be out there just like, read my stuff. And I do way less of it than I should, because it's not my favorite thing to sit down and do. Like, I want to just keep making more stuff, which is what everybody does. But if you have to make a living, you kind of, even if you just want to make it worth your time or make a few $100s a year off of it, you still are going to have to tell people about it in some way. And I think our generation is a little less, is way more sensitive to the idea of selling out. And if I'm 20, 25 right now, selling out is not even a concept.
Yeah.
Like these kids don't care,
no.
Which I think is like, I mean, it's probably good and bad, but like, to paraphrase Ice-T, selling out is the goal. Like, he's like, you think I want to live in a terrible neighborhood? Of course I'm selling out.
Yeah.
You're going to think I want to live in a dangerous neighborhood? Yeah, I sold out. But yeah, I mean, music artists can't make money selling albums anymore because nobody buys albums. So they like sell their songs to car companies to use in commercials. And like, I'm not hating on them because of that. I'm like, you got to eat, man.
Well, how do you think about maintaining your I feel like this is like a pretentious word, but like your voice, you've got there's a very specific kind of tone. Like when you see your work, whether it's the writing or your drawings or whatever, it's very clearly you. So how have you over the years kind of stayed true to what interests you, what you want to do, what you want to explore? Because you've evolved a lot. I mean, like it was writing, now it's writing and it's drawing and it's podcasting. And then like it used to be climbing was the main focus. And now it's a lot more ultra running. So like, how have you managed to evolve and make money without losing, doing shit when somebody shows up and they're like, we'll give you some money if you do this. And you're like, I don't want to do that. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying there's some sort of cohesive voice, but
there's 100%.
I think it's like self-deprecating, trying to be funny, trying to poke fun at ourselves, but also trying to say something like, hey, I was thinking about this. Maybe it would resonate with you too. But boy, I don't know. That's a good question. Like there's there still is. There's lots of quick money to be had,
Mm-hmm.
And like we're saying, selling out is not it's a thing that people do or don't do and may have an opinion about it or not. And I don't get approached that often for that. I kind of did earlier in my sort of Instagram, when Instagram was a bigger deal for me, but it was never like products I would actually use,
Mm-hmm.
It was like the whiskey company is not, I'm like, well,
like, how did you think this would be a fit?
Yeah. It's just like whatever. I don't care. People drink. That's fine. I don't drink. I don't believe in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going to sell it. So I don't think it's been a very, very challenging for me. I have, gotten inquiries from people and I'm like, it's almost a right fit, but
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't need boxes for the back of my truck to like, or whatever, to like, I like coolers. I don't really use coolers that much, So like somebody being like, do you want to review this cooler? I'm like, not really. Like, I don't even know how to compare it to another cooler.
Keeps it cold. Well, I feel like that's probably one of the reasons that, you can be confident when it comes time to sell is because you feel good about it. I remember when I was in the real estate business selling these big ranches and I have some rich guy in the car and I'm having to explain how great the elk hunting is on some big ranch. And I don't even know anything about elk hunting or talk about how great the fishing is. And there's like a bullshit factor to it that made me really uncomfortable. Then I got in the conservation world and like I could go to any foundation and I'd sell the shit out of that thing and I'd make, I wasn't scared to ask for a lot of money because I really believed in it. And I found the same thing with my stuff is like, as long as I feel good about it, I don't have any problem. I'm not pushing it on people, but I'm like, hey, here's what it is. You might like it, you might not. I feel like that's it's kind of freeing in a way.
Super confident.
Yeah.
You like
it's real confidence.
No. Yeah. I mean, I feel like real estate's like such a Venn diagram of like psychology and like maybe even sort of like relationship counseling and like
especially
marketing.
Residential.
Yeah. And you're like, yeah, it's minutes from the airport. And you're like, how many minutes? You're like minutes from downtown. Like 48 minutes from downtown in a moving car. You're like, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, I suppose that's correct, but like not really.
Yeah, I'm not good at it. Some people are good at bullshitting people, but I'm not. When did you decide to take your writing course online? How did that come about?
Last summer, 2 summers ago.
Yeah, I was a test case, remember?
That's right.
And it was very helpful.
What'd you think? Okay.
I thought, no, seriously. I put it in my newsletter. I've been messing around. Like I was looking when I was getting ready for this, I was thinking about since we met and talking and how long I've been talking about different things I want to write and how many books you've written in the time that I've just been talking. And when I took that course, it was because first of all, it's your style, which I really relate to. It's also funny and really teaches you some of the craft of being funny. And so I just thought it was really, really, really great. Like it snapped me out of it. And now I'm done with my thing where I will be next week. You don't get a cut of anything.
Oh, can we do like 2% of everything over $1 million?
Everything over $2 million.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah.
But how did that come about?
The writing course I felt like was really like so that was 2019, 2020. I was like 5 years of doing the writing course through Freeflow, and Freeflow is amazing. I love those experiences, but the Venn diagram of people who want to take a writing course, but also have the money to spend on a Freeflow course and can take a week off of work from their family. And we've been doing trail running. So then like the last few years has been like people who can run, go on a trail run 6 days straight. It's like, it makes it a pretty small overlap of Venn diagram. And we filled the courses every year, which is great, you know, and had a waiting list sometimes, but it was still like, well, more people could use this. And like, I don't know how many people have thousands of dollars to spend on a writing course, but definitely people have like $250, you know, like, yeah, that's cool.
And you can do it on your own timeline.
Yeah. And so I just kind of thought like, how do we break this down and give people something they can actually do in 6 weeks or however long they want to take to do it. And so it's just like, let's make it into all the components of a story and like why stories matter, what's important enough to write about. The humor thing, which you mentioned, is like the most difficult thing. Like people are like, don't try to dissect humor and like explain it to people. It doesn't work. And it's like, it is kind of tough, but you can show people techniques that work, that have been proven. So that's where that comes from. But yeah, like my mom took it. My mom's like,
really?
Yeah. Well, I said, I didn't charge her for it, but like, she's like, I wrote a story, you know, like, oh man, you did it, Mom. And she sent me her story, you know, and it's like, she's not a writer, you know, she's 70, she's gonna be 75 this year. But just like has time to do it and was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Well, the thing I liked about it, one of the many things, is that it's not overwhelming. Like the way you've structured it, sometimes I've taken a number of courses, and it just to even get the instructions of what I'm supposed to be doing is this huge commitment. And I feel like yours was just the right amount to where like it was enough to give me direction, but not so much that I never took action or I felt overwhelmed. And it made me, and ultimately the only thing you got to do is start writing. And it made me start writing.
By design too. Like I'm not over, what am I trying to say? I'm not fooling myself about like how much time people want to devote to things that I make. You know what I mean? I'm not like, well, I'm so great. You would obviously want to read this, you know, 8,000 word essay I wrote this week. It's like some days I write longer stuff, but most of the time I don't. So like the course, I was like, boy, if by the third or fourth email, people are like, oh my God, I can't read through all this stuff today. It's going to not work for them. And you want them to, I mean, people aren't going to finish it for many reasons, and maybe they won't write the story for many reasons. People get busy, whatever. I'm not judging anybody. But like, you don't want it to be your fault because you were like too long-winded or whatever. So each of them is designed to be like short read, quick examples. Here's an exercise at the end. You know, you don't want people having to like put it off and be like, oh, I got to do that thing. And like, you know, as soon as I get the dishes washed and the kids put to bed and now I have this 45-minute email to read with a 2-hour exercise at the end of it. So unfortunately, to produce an actual story, there is a point, I think it's lesson 9 maybe, where you do have to actually write, you know, and it's like, okay, you're probably going to need a few hours to do this or several walks around the block.
Well,
or
at
whatever.
that point, they're invested, though.
Yeah, hopefully, right? Yeah. So it's like, but a lot of it's just very simple exercises. And then hopefully, you know, between the emails arrive on Monday and Thursday when you sign up for it. So hopefully in between those 3-4 day breaks you have, you're still having time to think about the components or whatever you learned.
When you describe that course, I feel like that the way you describe it with the end user in mind and trying to be helpful, trying to add value is, you know, not about you. Like the end goal is to help somebody. And I feel like with a lot of your stuff, we've talked about this a lot, but this abundance mentality versus the scarcity mentality. And I feel like that's part of your business strategy of you know, earning a living from this. It's a part of the style of how you write. And so could you talk a bit about that and how that's kind of influenced things you do?
I think I take a lot away from people like Ryan Holiday. He had a book called Perennial Seller that I read.
You recommended that to me. It's so
2018. I read it, and it was, a lot of it was just encouraging you to give things away and like stories about people who had like, I remember one of the stories was like a guy who was an established author at the time, but self-published a book and gave away it was like 10,000 copies of the book.
Really?
It was a very specific target audience. It was like some section of the military or something like that. And that was that was not only a marketing strategy, but a sales strategy. It's like, if I get this out there, people will talk about it. And I think nowadays, like having done stuff with book publishers and self-published books myself, they're kind of like, sometimes they're like in the contract, it's like, you get 25 copies of the book to give out. And I'm like, can we change this to 100? Mm-hmm. And being beyond that, like, cause I'm going to give away 100 copies. We're not going to be like, oh no, you got to pay for it. Like, that's not a good way to help people get your book. And then on top of that, the publicity folks will send out books for you, and they'll say, hey, give us a list of names and addresses of people you think would like advance copies of the book. And I'm like, cool, that's a good idea, but can you just ship me the box of books, and I will send the books out to the people I think would like it, which does a lot of different things. The publicist, a lot of times, this is their job. They'll send the book out, and they'll send this, cover letter with it. This like, please post something about this book on social media by April 18th or whatever. Our publication date is such and such. It's very important for pre-orders. And it's like, okay, that's a very business-like way to do it. I just send it to my friends, and I'm like, hey, Ed, you might like this. Mm-hmm. I don't know, whatever. Yeah. But no pressure. It's like a gift, right? Mm-hmm. It's probably a lot less effective, but it's a handwritten note from me.
I think it's more effective.
Maybe, but it's like, I'm not that big of a deal. I got time to sign, like write little notes to people for like 50 or 100 bucks. It's fine. I can do it. Yeah. And then I just have them reimburse me for the, the postage or whatever. Which I think is like that sort of abundance idea. It's like my time I have time, mm-hmm. but I also like, it makes it feel so much better to feel like you got a gift from somebody than to just have this book show up and maybe this impersonal note from somebody you've never met.
Yeah. Just like a photo. I get a bunch of these, and it's just some like Xeroxed, sales pitch about the book.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know.
Which is marketing, and like, if I'm a big deal author and I got a lot of stuff going on, it's probably the best that you do that. But like, I'm not that big of a deal. I got time.
Well, like Seth Godin, one time I remember he had a new book come out, and I ordered it, and then it showed up in the mail, and there were 2 copies of the book in there. And everybody who pre-ordered the book got 2 copies. He's like, here's one for you. Give one to your friend.
Exactly. One to give away. I forget which book that was, but I remember
it was like a blue one.
Yeah.
When It's Your Turn, What to Do When It's Your Turn.
I have that book. Yeah. Yep.
Seth Godin is, I don't know him. I did meet him one time at the airport. I saw him.
Really?
Yeah. And he was super nice, but, he shares that you, the other guy that I take advice from is Rick Wittenbreaker from Howler Brothers, super, super generous, abundance mentality. And then Seth Godin is like that. How do you think about using a publisher versus self-publishing? Because you've done both well. And I feel like the volume that you put out, again, like as I just talk, you just keep putting out books. Like if somebody was coming to you and they're like, I'm considering reaching out to publishers, or I just do it myself, how would you help them navigate that question? Because I don't know that there's a right answer.
It's complicated. I'm actually trying to put together another email or another online course called Demystifying Publishing. And this is one of the things I wrestle with, like how to present this. And like for somebody like me, I have a significant like chunk of followers that I can send a book to, or announce that I have a new book and people will buy it, not to the point that I'm not getting on the Today Show with this book and selling 1 million copies, but like it depends for sure. And I'm at the point where I just like to make books. Like I made a book a few years ago called 15-Second Recipes.
My daughters love that. They think it's the funniest thing they've ever, like my youngest carries it around.
That warms my heart. Yeah. It's amazing. But like, I kind of half pitched it to a publisher I worked for, and she's like, lol, this isn't really a book. And I was like, okay, fine.
Want to bet?
And like they do cookbooks, and like I get it. It's definitely not a book they should do, because they do like these beautiful full color cookbooks and like it's almost insulting, but I was like, no, it's funny. It's funny, dude. We're going to do it. And I couldn't, like at that time, you couldn't print a book that small with the print on demand publishers. So I actually found a company that makes like real estate brochures, and because I wanted to have a binding, and I just got 1,000 of them made for like, I forget, it was like $2 a piece or something. I eventually sold through almost all of them, I think. Yeah, I did sell through all of them, but I was like, it's just fun, man.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, this is funny. And like to send that to your friend and be like, yeah, it's like 15-minute recipes, but seconds. Get it? So
something about Mary, 6-minute abs, not 7.
6. Yeah, exactly. But I got this buddy of mine from high school, Tony, who's a very successful chiropractor and entrepreneur in Chicago. He's like the king of just pranks, of just like jokes.
Yeah.
And he is not afraid to spend money on a joke. And like, you know, when Jay was born, our son, this box showed up, and I opened the box and I look in it, and there's this shrink wrap thing, and it's like expanding bear. And like, as soon as you cut this thing open, it's like a mattress in a box. And this thing, it just blows up to this giant bear. Right. And I look in this thing, and I'm Hillary's on the couch, like, you know, feeding Jay or something. I go, this is what's in this box. And I go, I give you 2 guesses who this is from. And she goes, Tony. And I'm like, yeah. And I text Tony, and Tony also happens to be 7 feet tall. And I just take a picture of the box, and I text it to him. I said, this you? And he goes, everybody needs a giant in their life, Brendan. But the point is like that he just like still has fun with this stuff. And I think like jokes are hilarious. If you spend a little money on the joke, even better. If it goes through the mail or shipping, it's even better. It like magnifies or multiplies the joke. And like, that's kind of what that book was. It's just like, hey man, this is just be funny to send to people.
It is
and
funny.
Like to spend a little money on it. And like, did I break even? Yeah, I think so. I probably made a few $100s. And if you don't count the time I put into it, I'm not sitting around going, I got to make this book pay. I have to like, you know, per hour, I have to make, you know, $25 an hour making this book. It was more just like, well, this will be fun. And I kind of do that with everything now. And so to like long way around to your question, like that book was not right for a publisher. That publisher, the lady I work with, Judy, she has to look at a book and say, can we sell 50,000 copies of this? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is like, maybe, probably not, they can't take it on. You know, like they got to make money. They got to feed how many people and health insurance and all that stuff. It's a business, right? They're moving widgets, and widgets are books. And like, if I self-publish, I don't have to sell 50,000 copies. I don't even have to sell 500. I can just waste money on it if I want to, and it's fine. It's like, you know, people spend money on like golf or Netflix or whatever, and like that's kind of maybe my hobby, you know? So I like doing it because I can sell 1,000 copies of a book and say, well, that was fine. You know, went okay. It's fun to have it out there, whatever. And everything is kind of like that in my world. I also, caveat, have never had an agent. I've worked with one big publisher and a bunch of small publishers. Financially, it works out differently with every book.
Like, can you give an overview, just a high level of like dollars made per book if you self-publish versus going with the publisher? Yeah,
I compared two of the early books I got. One I got published with a small publisher, Mountaineers Books, and then one I self-published. Mountaineers actually rejected this book, so I self-published it.
Which one was that?
It's called the New American Road Trip Mixtape. It's the one I was saying I'm not. It's one I would redo a little bit if I had the chance. And I think they rejected it, and I put it out myself, and however many copies it sold in the first 6 months, it was like 1,500 or so, or more than that. I don't remember. I went back to him and said, hey, that book sold this many. I don't know if you'd think about taking on a different one I wrote. And they're like, oh, that's actually really good. Sure, let's talk. But whatever, let's see. The self-published one came out in 2013. The one they did publish, 60 Meters Anywhere, came out in 2016. Pretty similar sales numbers as far as the copies sold go. But the one I self-published made way more money.
Really?
Yeah, because again, they have a whole staff of people, whatever. I think I made roughly $1 a book with the publisher, and the ones I can set the price for, I can make like $4 or $5 a book.
Oh, wow.
So, which doesn't mean it's a better book. It didn't have an editor besides the people I sent it to. So it's like there's so many different ways of thinking about it and so many different reasons to do one or the other. But like, yeah, you can, for a book that you price at like $18, $19, if you're publishing it yourself, you probably make $5 a copy. If you publish it through a publisher, you're probably making like $1 if it's a paperback. So if all you want to do is make money, then maybe you self-publish. If all you want is the best thing possible, maybe you work with a publisher who's going to have your book go through several rounds of edits and blah, 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 you know, that whole process. But if you're just like purely numbers wise, you have to sell way fewer books when you self-publish. So, and the last one I published, Ultra something, I actually paid an editor $3,000 to go through it a couple times.
Yep.
Designed the cover myself. So I think Kevin, the editor, was the only expense. I'm not sure if I'm in the black on that one yet.
Really?
Yeah, and I didn't care. I recorded the audiobook myself, which was a whole process.
Dude, I couldn't. I just think how long it takes me to do a podcast intro.
Well, we live on we have a busy street pretty close, and people like to drive loud trucks where we live, and so I could only record between 8:30 and bedtime for me. So it was a lot of late nights of just like recording a sentence, hearing an engine, starting over. And had I to do it over, I would just go to this recording studio in town and pay them for like 3 days of recording and just smash it out there for like $1,000. But it was a big learning process for sure.
One of the things I love about just in general your work is like kind of a willingness to do it yourself, and like you're open to everything, but you're willing to go wherever you need to go to make things happen. I think about your films and filmmaking and like How to Run 100 Miles. I just, I loved it. And that was, with REI versus Seven Summits in My Backyard, which I love that. And that was really just you and a GoPro camera, right?
And an iPhone.
Yeah. I remember I asked, because I was getting a GoPro then, and I asked you what kind you had, and it was like
the Hero 9.
9.
Yeah, which they're on like 14 now or 13 or something like that.
What was that process? Like, can you talk about how that thing came to be? Because if I remember correctly, it was maybe going to be part of some larger project, and then you just ended up putting it out on your own, right?
Well, Arc'teryx they gave me money for it. Okay. So I actually did have a friend do the final edit.
Yeah.
Paid a friend for some music, paid another friend for some drone footage. Where did the money go? Anyway, I got the money. but the guy who okayed the money was more of a ambassador program. That's where he was giving the money from. And he wasn't communicating with the people in their film side. And like, if you look at everything they do film wise, it is like super high production value and like beautiful and like usually pretty serious. And so in communicating with the film people, when I just like, because this film is ridiculous. It's called Seven Summits in My Neighborhood. And it was
neighborhood. Sorry, I said backyard.
Yeah. It was like taking the idea of the seven summits, which I'm never going to do, you know, because they're very expensive. And, begins with me calling my mom and asking her if she has like whatever, $175,000 that she can give me. They're like, no, I don't. Okay, well, maybe I'll just do the 7 summits that I can see from my dog walks here in Missoula. And so I did that. And my buddy who does music, Ian, I was like, I need like this mega over the top dramatics music to like blast in every single time we introduce a new mountain. And that was super fun to let him do. But yeah, when it came time, when it was done, I kept emailing the guys. I'm like, you guys, you think this will go out like soon? And they're like, yeah, we're thinking fall. And like fall came and went. I was like, hey, I kept checking back. And finally I was like, do you mind if I just put it on YouTube? And they're like, that's great. And they later told me it was not that guy, but a different guy when we got hired to do some TikToks for them. Brendan Davis and I did. They told me that TikTok was the only place they could be funny as a brand. That's really? That was the place they could do it, which I think makes sense to them. Like
the YouTube has to be like hardcore mountain climbing, just type adventure stuff.
Just not goofy, and I don't really do serious stuff. I mean, I do, but like not in that. It's not that fun. So, I mean, we made these TikToks for them that like Brendan was just here a week ago.
That dude is hilarious.
And he was like they didn't even put all of them on TikTok. And I go, yeah. I mean, one of them was like the beginning was, so my idea was always going to be all POV footage. So like a GoPro looking down so that like, you know, whether or not you identify as a man or a woman, you know, like you could imagine yourself in the video, like you were doing it. And the first idea we had was like, is a person talking about how to talk to other people on a ski lift, on a chair lift. And it was all this awkward stuff. Like, talk about your last relationship. And like, you know, even if it wasn't your fault, it ended, blah, blah, blah. And it was this thing about making the chairlift ride super awkward. And the whole time the visual is it's a POV camera looking down, and it's this person eating this giant freezer bag of hot dogs, like not in buns, just like this bag of hot dogs. And Brendan was doing it, and he's just housing these hot dogs going in the ski lift in Eldora, and he looks over, and this lady is on the chairlift with him, and is just looking at him like he has 3 heads. And you can see why we didn't get hired for a lot of work. But so the film did okay, and like I even sent it to some film festivals, and you know they were all like, no thanks, except for Vancouver.
Really?
Yeah, they're great, and it had the Arc'teryx logo on the film, and I think Arc'teryx sponsors that film festival, so maybe there was a little. And they actually asked if I could MC the trail running night, which would have been awesome, but I wasn't able to then. But yeah, they weren't going to market that film. You know, they're not like, we're proud of this. It's like, I don't know what this guy's doing.
I would much rather watch that than, because the thing is, and if I remember correctly, you put it out, and then like within a week, there had been a few people who did their own versions.
Alistair Humphreys.
Yeah, like he did one. He went around and made his own version, and then it's made me. I'm too lazy to do it, but I've looked around where I live, and I'm like, what are the highest points? Like, how could I link together some crazy thing?
That'd be like Pikes Peak.
Oh, it'd be Pikes Peak, Almagre. There's a bunch of them around there.
Yeah, you would have a much harder time, especially if you were going from your house.
Oh, dude.
Which is what I did, and it was easy. It's kind of easy here. The longest one is like 30 miles by bike and foot. So, and it was a big deal. But like Al lives in, you know, like basically the outskirts of London. So it's pretty easy for him. But he does that kind of stuff. He's the guy who wrote, you know, Micro Adventures, and his most recent book, Local. Huge fan of that book. He gets a 1 kilometer grid square map made. So 1 kilometer on each side, if I have this right, with his house in the center of it. And it's broken down into like, I want to say 200 some squares.
Yeah.
And he has a random number generator pick out a number for him every week for 52 weeks a year. And he goes to that square, and he just like explores that square. And it's just like wild, man. Like, it's so boring, and it's incredible that he made this like book about it. And he learns all this stuff about like history, plants, like just everything. And it's incredible like that he does this all within this little square. And it's like to prove a point, because this guy has like ridden his bicycle around the world for 4 years, kayaked across the Atlantic Ocean. Right before his first kid was born, he walked across India. He just like literally picked a river. It was like, I'm just going to walk next to it till I get across the country. And I talked to him about this, and he was like, that was maybe not the right decision at the time, considering my wife was pregnant. Anyway, he did this incredible book, and like, it's phenomenal. And he admits in the beginning, he's like, if you think I'm just this guy walking around, like just thinking about all these things, I went into these squares, and I would come back with like a list of things to Google, and that's how I learned all this stuff. Like, yeah, which is incredible, an incredible way to see your environment. But yeah, Al, the 7 Summits of Your Neighborhood was like, I think he was literally like, I can't believe I didn't think of that, you know?
No, I think I love that. I love how you appreciate things like that, like these very extremely niche. I mean, I don't even think niche is the right word for that, but when people kind of come up with some crazy thing that doesn't make any sense. Like we were talking about that hilarious Roadhouse book that you clued me into. And it's this guy every single day, wrote an essay about Roadhouse for 365 days. And you were like, you know, Roadhouse is great, whatever. But that is just so interesting to do. And then, I don't know, how do you think about that? Like people, you write about that in Ultra something. If I remember, you talk about the Buffalo Bills, people who are just obsessed with the Buffalo Bills and you don't care about the Buffalo Bills, but you can really appreciate people that are obsessed with this just niche thing that ultimately, when everything's said and done, it probably doesn't mean much. But it's this. How do you think about people that do this kind of crazy, really, really niche stuff? It's kind of a weird question, but I feel like you kind of, like we were talking about my obsession with jiu-jitsu. You're like, I don't care anything about that, but I just love when people go all in on something.
Yeah, or just like have a community through something. But like none of this stuff makes any sense, you know? It's like, and I think that's the larger point I was trying to get across in the book was like, theoretically, it's about not theoretically, that's the wrong word. It's about ultra marathons, which are ridiculous and insane, but I think they're no more insane than anything else we get obsessed with, you know, like the Buffalo Bills, the Bills Mafia is, people are crazy, you know? And the big point to me is that team has never won a Super Bowl.
Never, yeah.
And they've gotten close many times. It's like the most heartbreaking team to watch, right? But these people are still into it. And I don't think that's any less sensible than rooting for a team that wins, you know? But the point is, like, we all find something, or hopefully we find something we're passionate about, no matter what it is. It's like model trains, you know, or something like that. And like, that's cool. That's so much better than just sitting back and wishing you had something to care about, you know? And I think that's what I like, no matter what, as long as it's not causing harm to other people, obviously, which, but yeah, to that point, it's like you and I were talking about, this sort of like male loneliness epidemic that, you know, we talk about. And I'm kind of saying, I think if people still had hobbies, we would have more friends, you know? And like, I think if you don't have anything you care about, it's really hard to connect with people.
Yep. Well, and the interesting thing I think with hobbies is that, like, I think we probably all have in our mind, or I do, people that I feel like I have stuff in common with, you know, and just like there are a lot of people in Missoula, I feel like they like the outdoors, they, you know, all this kind of stuff, whether they're creative. But what I've found with jiu-jitsu, at least, is that I can form these connections with people that I have on the surface, I have absolutely nothing in common with. But yet we've got this bond that's closer than people that I've known for 30 years. And so I feel like that's what hobbies can do for you, you know, in a community. And you're not thinking about this bullshit politics or whatever. You're thinking about this shared experience.
I don't have that as a hobby. You know, the closest thing I have is a kid, which kids, when you see other people and you have a kid, like a kid can bridge the gap between people with any number of differences, you know, and it's like, we all get it, you know?
Well, even in ultras though, I think I've, you know, being in the back and walking most of the time, you end up kind of linking up with people for stretches. And some
you
of them,
I walk? No, I'm just joking.
I call it a walking picnic. That's what an ultra marathon is, just walking and eating. But like some of these people you meet, I mean, they're like the most interesting people ever. Some of them are, you know, you would look at them and be like, oh, I might, you know, that's a guy I might have gone to school with or whatever. And then some of them, you know, are just straight up ex-heroin addicts or whatever. And, but you've got this cool bond with them and you've got this thing in common. I don't know, man.
Isn't this the dumbest thing we could do this weekend? You know? Everybody at ultra marathons at the starting line, I like to look around. I'm like, everybody here is the weirdest person at their office.
Yes.
Or their family. You know, if you're like, oh, that's Ed. He does ultra marathons. What a whack job. And you're like, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I told my granddad one time, he was a World War II guy. I was going on some climbing trip or something. And my mom told me to explain it as if I was going on a hiking trip. And I told him, I was like, I'm going hiking in Alaska. He's like, hiking? Huh. I used to do a little bit of hiking in the South Pacific during World War II, and I had people trying to kill me the whole time. I was like, but I didn't. That's why I'm doing this.
I'm just trying to find meaning.
Yeah.
My buddy from high school, his dad was like kind of like super laid back, super slow talking dude, Gary. And I convinced Rob to go climb Mount Shasta with us as part of this group fundraising for the nonprofit I worked for. And it's like, the night before, we're going to get up at midnight to go do the summit, you know, go summit because you have to go up when the snow is still hard and whatever. And Rob goes, I told my dad that we were getting out of bed at midnight to go to climb for our summit day, to climb the mountain. And I was like, what did Gary say? And he goes, that is the dumbest goddamn thing I have ever heard.
And it kind of is.
Yeah, and I'm like, I could see his face when he was saying that.
He's got a point.
Yeah, no, you're right, Gary.
One more question about your writing, filmmaking, all of it. How do you think about humor? Because I feel like your humor is, first of all, it's hilarious, but it's also not, there's not an ounce of meanness in it. And I feel like a lot of times nowadays people want to do funny stuff at the expense of other people. Well, and that's always just like a cheap laugh. But I feel like you're able to be funny, but it's never at anybody's expense other than maybe yourself. You make fun of yourself. When you're teaching humor, do you have any like kind of frameworks you give people to think about it?
Give people a list of techniques, that are kind of tried and true normal things like the rule of threes and absurdity and stuff like that, misdirection. But I also pass out a list of my personal rules for humor, which I think might actually be in the writing course. But number one is making fun of us is okay. Making fun of them is not okay.
Yeah.
Which is, that's just, if I can include myself in a group, I can make fun of them, but like, I'm a white guy, I'm a dad, I'm a straight male. I'm not making fun of people who don't fit in those categories. That's called racism, or misogyny or, any of these things. And I also can't speak to those experiences, but like the deepest well for humor that I can think of is my own life. Like I am an idiot. Like I'm never going to run out of shit. Right. And I think like what you're saying is like people, it's easy, yeah, and you can your humor, if you are making fun of somebody who's different than you, can travel so much further on the internet. You can be so much more successful, but you are dividing people more and more and more every time you do that, And I laugh at that stuff when other people do it. I'm like, oh yeah, people I disagree with politically, they're all like this or whatever, and whatever. I feel kind of bad about it, and I don't try to spread it. I'm not like
you can't help it.
You can help not spreading it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Worst case, I'd be like, show it to my wife and be like, yeah, what do you think? Isn't that funny? Or like text it to one buddy. But like, if you're doing that all day, every day, yeah, you're making people laugh, but they all agree with you. And the other side is doing the exact same thing. And it's funny, like the same type of humor that you would laugh at if it's about this type of person, you'd be so offended by if it was, if it was directed at you. And like, I just don't need that, because I also can't deal with the fallout from it, which is people coming after you or like disagreeing with you and like making fun of you in the comments section or whatever, or like emailing you mean stuff. And it's like, well, maybe if I'm not a dick, people won't be a dick back to me. And like, that's been pretty effective most of the time.
Well, I think that's kind of a theme of a lot of your work, is to treat other people like you want to be treated, whether it's the funny stuff or whether it's how you design the writing course or how, everything you put out in the world. It does have almost like a level of empathy for the end user of it, like it's, I don't know. It's just, it's very, it's nice because I feel like nowadays everything is about commentating or saying why other people are wrong or ripping into, worst case, just being mean. Sometimes just criticizing people's work. I mean, it's really easy to do that. Whereas you're creating stuff that's funny, but other than yourself, nobody's the butt end of the joke. You know what I mean? In a mean way.
Maybe to a fault, I would say, my own stuff. Like, I'm like, wow, like I overthink it. Some people would say you shouldn't even consider the audience. I think Rick Rubin says something like that in The Creative Life or whatever his book's called.
Does he?
And I'm like, okay, dude who's been living in Malibu for like 30 years.
Exactly.
Has bajillions of dollars. Like, I got to consider the audience because I need to pay my mortgage.
Sure.
But I think it's also like, how would this sound to X person if they find my stuff on the internet? And like, I don't want to be the worst part of anybody's day, I think that's it's probably oversensitive, and I'm probably oversensitive to people's feedback, if it's negative, and like, but I just can't, it takes too much away from like the next thing I want to do. If I'm walking around all day thinking about, oh, this person really got offended at this thing I said in this piece I wrote, and like, I'm going to think about that for 5-6 hours, maybe multiple days, and it just wrecks it, and I can't make stuff then. So it's better for me to just like not do it.
I agree. I mean, I think everybody wins, yourself included, when you have that. I feel like over the last day or two, I wish we could have a percentage of how much we've been talking about books, because it's just, have you read this? Have you read that? Any good books you've read recently?
Yeah, the one I loaned you last night is called The Dad Rock That Made Me a Woman by Nico Stratus. Because you recommend books for me, but I recommend books to you, and I think Ed would never read this. Like he would never encounter this.
No, I wouldn't even know it existed.
But yeah, it's a trans woman who grew up as a man in the Yukon, working in a glass shop, doing like manual labor stuff, and like gradually over the course of, it took a long time to try to come out as trans, and she now lives in Toronto and is a fantastic writer about music. I think it helped that each chapter is a song, and I knew almost all the songs until later in the book, where I was like, oh, I got to listen to this one and see, what it is. But just really good points about like masculinity, for one thing. Mm-hmm. There was a passage in there about like all these things we try to like, put on ourselves or like, show the world. And she was like, it's peacocking for an audience that doesn't care and is not looking at you. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh wow, that really hits home. But she was at the time a young man who was like, didn't feel good in the body they were in. And then like, was like buying a truck and tools and like trying to like project. Mm-hmm. And like, there's just so much good stuff in that book. Like there's a passage where she was like, at this time, she tried to come out like 2 or 3 different times. I think 3 different times. And like, I feel like the second time she was like, I also had started wearing a lot of black jeans and some leather. And, I think it's like one of her friends thought she was trying to come out as goth. And she's like, I am going to butcher it, but she's like, I think it would actually be harder to come out as goth in your 40s than trans. Yeah. But it was fantastic. And like, it was just, I follow her newsletter. That's how I knew about it. Yeah. What else? Boy, I have I think it's the Penguin Classics. There's 50 very small books. Mm-hmm. I bought the entire box set of, and like these little things like Letter from Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King is the first one. And they're, Wendell Berry's Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer is number 50, I think. And in between there's all these authors, and some of them are poetry. I'm on number 2 right now, because I feel like cheating. Yeah, they're like 50 pages.
I need that. Yeah,
it's not hard to find, but it's like, and it's only like $70 for 50
books.
Yeah,
holy cow.
So, but it's a whole thing. So
I just started Ron Chernow's book about Mark Twain, and it's like 1,100 pages. Whoa, so that's the exact opposite end of I don't know how or when I'm going to finish it. But all right, dude, you got construction work to do around here. I can shoot some nails for you, but thank you for letting me barge in your house and ask you questions and jam microphones in your face. You're the man.
Well, thanks for feeling like I'm useful enough or relevant enough to making me feel like I'm relevant enough to actually be on your podcast.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number 1, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number 2, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.